Barefoot, black boy claims. He can save mechanic's daughter. What follows will leave you speechless. What if the only thing that could wake a little girl from a mysterious coma wasn't science, but a barefoot boy no one else could see? Lila, a 10-year-old thought to be lost forever, returns from the edge after a stranger whispers one truth. Your daddy's waiting on the other side. But who is this boy? And why does he vanish every time someone tries to find him? This isn't just a story. It's a miracle wrapped in mystery, love, and song. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that touch the soul. Mason Grant had never believed in omens, but something about that morning felt off. Maybe it was the way the sky hung low and gray, like it hadn't slept well, or the way Lila hesitated on the porch, clutching her purple backpack as if it might blow away in the breeze. She was quiet, which wasn't unusual. Lila was a thoughtful kid, but there was something else, something fragile in her silence that Mason couldn't name. "You okay, Bug?" he asked, brushing a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. She shrugged. "Just tired." Mason smiled gently and opened the truck door for her. "Well, I'm picking you up early today. Got that dentist appointment at 3, remember?" Lila nodded, then hesitated again. "Dad? Yeah?" She looked at him, eyes wide and unreadable. "Nothing," she whispered, then climbed in and buckled up. The rest of the morning passed in pieces. Coffee reheated twice, an engine that wouldn't start in a customer's car, a voicemail from the dentist office rescheduling. And then the call. The kind of call that drags the world from under your feet. It was the school nurse. Lila had collapsed outside her classroom. One minute she was tying her shoelaces, and the next she was face down on the concrete, unresponsive. By the time Mason tore into the ER parking lot, red-faced and shaking, she was already in a room. Machines blinked. Monitors beeped. Wires and tubes wrapped around her tiny frame like vines around a tree. She didn't move. Not even a flutter. The diagnosis came 2 hours later. Acute neural suppression. A phrase that sounded both official and meaningless. Doctors threw around terms like non-traumatic coma, idiopathic shutdown, and no clear prognosis. One young neurologist with trembling hands said it was like someone turned her brain down to 0 without flipping the off switch. No brain injury, no seizure, no trauma, just darkness. Mason sat beside her bed in a room that smelled like antiseptic and plastic, the walls too white, too clean. He held her hand as if he could pump life back into her through his calloused fingers. He whispered to her. He sang to her. He told her dumb jokes he used to tell her when she scraped her knees. Nothing changed. Day 1 turned into day 3, then 5. Nurses came and went in the soft shoes and softer voices. One gave him a fresh cup of coffee every morning without asking. Another brought a blanket from the ped's floor because those ICU ones are scratchy. The staff called it a watchful vigil. The social worker called it a prolonged traumatic event. Mason didn't care what they called it. He wasn't leaving. By the end of the week, the whispers began. Insurance concerns, room turnover policy, ethics committee meetings. That's when he showed up. Silas Maddox didn't knock. He entered the room like he owned it. Which, to be fair, he did. He was the majority stakeholder in the hospital network, a biotech magnate who had built his empire on wearable health diagnostics and AI-powered diagnostics. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Mason's mortgage and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I read about your daughter," Silas said smoothly. "Terrible, truly. But I believe we can help." Mason blinked. "We?" "My team. We're on the cutting edge. Predictive diagnostics, neural stimulation, you name it. We're trialing a new system that could rewire her synaptic pathways, jumpstart dormant cognitive functions. Think of it like updating her software." Mason's jaw tightened. "She's not a computer," Silas chuckled. "No, of course not. But let's not pretend a love alone will wake her up." He handed Mason a folder thick with consent forms. "Everything's covered. No charge. Consider it a philanthropic gesture." Mason looked at Lila. Her cheeks were pale, her lips dry. Her chest rose and fell beneath the cartoon unicorn blanket someone had placed over her. He signed the papers, and the machines came first, sleek towers of lights and sounds. Then the specialists, one from Switzerland, another from Tokyo. They spoke fast and moved faster, treating Lila like a prototype, not a person. They ran simulations and VR scenarios, injected tracers, scanned brainwaves. Lila didn't budge. Mason watched as hope became performance. A show for media attention, a trophy case in progress. Silas returned twice, each time with cameras in tow, giving interviews about innovative care and the future of medicine. And still, Lila slept. One night, sometime after midnight, Mason sat slouched in the chair beside her bed, his face in his hands. His back ached. His soul ached. He didn't remember the last time he ate or slept. He just watched her. Like if he stared hard enough, she'd open her eyes. The nurse tapped gently on the window. "Mr. Grant?" He looked up. "There's a boy in the lobby asking for you." Mason blinked. "A boy?" She nodded. "Says he wants to help your daughter." Mason followed her out, too tired to argue. In the lobby, under the cold fluorescence, sat a barefoot kid no older than 8, wrapped in a hoodie 3 sizes too big. His jeans were torn, his cheeks smudged with dirt. But his eyes, those eyes, were clear, steady, and old in a way no child's eyes should be. "You Mason?" the boy asked softly. "I am," Mason said. "Who are you?" The boy didn't answer. "I can help her," he said instead. Mason rubbed his temples. "Kid, listen. I don't know who sent you, but this is a hospital. This is serious." "I know it's serious," the boy interrupted. "She's between places right now. Not gone, not back. Just afraid." Mason stared at him. "How do you know that?" "She's waiting to know if it's safe to return," the boy said. "She needs your voice, not your hope, not your strength, your truth." Mason felt like the floor swayed under his feet. "What do you mean?" The boy stepped closer. "There's something you never said. Something she needs to hear." Mason's throat closed up. "Why would she need that?" "Because she loves you, but she's scared you don't love yourself anymore." Mason's mouth went dry. He looked at the nurse. She shrugged, eyes wide. The boy tilted his head. "Can I sit with her?" Every rational bone in Mason's body screamed no, but his soul, raw and cracked open, whispered yes. "Okay," Mason said, almost inaudibly. The boy followed him into the room and stood at Lila's bedside. He didn't touch anything, just closed his eyes and whispered something Mason couldn't hear. Then he turned to Mason. "Now you." "What?" "She knows you're here, but she doesn't know why you stayed." Mason looked at his daughter, so small, so still, and for the first time since it all began, he let the truth pour out. "I was mad," he whispered. "We argued that morning. I told her she needed to grow up. I said she was being dramatic. She said she had a headache. I thought she was faking it to get out of school." His voice cracked. "I kissed her goodbye, but I didn't mean it. I was still upset. I missed her smile at breakfast. I missed the signs. I should have known something was wrong. I should have come home sooner. I should have told her I was sorry." His knees buckled. "Please, baby. Please come back. I swear I'll never miss another second." The room was still. Then, just once, the heart monitor blipped slightly faster. Mason gasped. The boy nodded. "She's listening." He turned to leave. "Wait," Mason called. "What's your name?" The boy paused, hand on the doorframe. "They call me Micah," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow." And just like that, he walked into the dim hallway, barefoot and silent, like he belonged to another world. Mason sat beside Lila, stunned. He didn't sleep, he didn't blink, He just stared at her, watched her chest rise and fall, and whispered her name over and over again, because something had changed, not in the machines, not in the scans, in him, and somehow she felt it. The next morning, Mason awoke with a start, not because of a beeping monitor or a nurse's soft knock, but because of silence. The kind of deep, settling silence that seeps under your skin and makes you feel like something's waiting to happen. He blinked at the ceiling, trying to recall if last night had really happened. Had a barefoot boy truly sat in this room and told him how to reach his daughter? Had Lila's heart monitor really jumped just after he spoke his guilt aloud? He turned to look at her. She was still, but not empty. Her hand remained where it had always been, limp on the blanket, but there was a softness in her brow that hadn't been there yesterday, like the storm behind her eyelids had quieted just a little. Mason leaned in, brushing a thumb gently across her cheek. "Still with me, baby?" he whispered. "Still listening?" No answer, but the silence felt different. The door creaked open, and Nurse Paula poked her head in. "Morning," she said, holding a coffee cup. "Still no change?" Mason shook his head. She stepped in and set the cup beside him. "I saw you talking to someone last night." He nodded. "Micah." She frowned slightly. "Who?" "The boy. About this tall gray hoodie, barefoot. Said his name was Micah." Paula stared at him. "Mason, I didn't see any boy." "You were the one who told me he was in the lobby." "No, I wasn't." Mason's heart skipped. "Yes, you came in, said there was a boy here to see Lila." She shook her head. "I clocked out around 10, didn't come back on shift until 6. He stared at her, confused. "Then who—" But she was already moving on, fluffing Lila's pillow, checking the IV line. "Sometimes stress plays tricks," she said gently. "You haven't really slept. It's okay." Mason didn't argue. What could he say? That a mysterious child told him his daughter needed his truth, not his strength? That Lila responded to his confession with a flicker of life? They'd call it wishful thinking. Or worse. By noon, Silas Maddox returned. He came in like he always did. Sharp suit, glossy shoes, 2 assistants flanking him with tablets. One of them filmed everything silently. Mason hated that. "Still stable," Silas said, not even looking at Mason. "Vitals holding. Brain activity unchanged." He turned to the assistant. "Note that. Status quo. Initiate next sequence." "What sequence?" Mason asked, already dreading the answer. "We've developed a cognitive simulation that mimics familial interaction," Silas said, waving his hand like it was obvious. "We'll use AI avatars based on your facial data, your voice samples, and inject them into a VR experience for her. Create emotional recall loops. If there's even a flicker of consciousness, this should reach it." "She's not a lab rat," Silas smirked. "She's your daughter, and she deserves every chance." "Then give her peace, not flashing lights and algorithms." Silas glanced down at the folder in his assistant's hand. "You already signed consent for full neurological intervention." Mason stood. "You didn't say anything about AI clones of me." Silas shrugged. "We do what science demands." Mason clenched his fists. "No. You do what you demand. For headlines, for stockholders. You didn't come here for her. You came here for you." A beat passed. The room pulsed with tension. Then Silas smiled again, cold and composed. "We'll begin in an hour." Mason didn't say another word. He walked out. He didn't know where he was going, just that he needed air. Needed to get away from the sterile brightness and the robotic buzz of machines. He ended up on the rooftop garden, a concrete slab with a few benches and potted plants nobody watered anymore. He sat, hands between his knees, heart thudding too loud for the quiet space. He thought about Micah, about what the boy had said. She's waiting to know if it's safe to return. Mason didn't feel like safety. He felt like a mess, angry, exhausted, confused. He hadn't sung to Lila in years. Hadn't told her a story since her mother passed. He'd buried that part of himself so deep he forgot where he left it. But she remembered. That's what tore him apart. Lila remembered what he had tried to forget. Back downstairs, the machines were in place. 3 techs in the lab coats adjusted the setup around Lila's head. A slim headset wrapped across her temples, linked to a tablet that showed streams of data Mason didn't understand. "She won't feel anything," one of the techs told him. "It's non-invasive." He didn't respond. "Beginning Phase 1, another said, tapping the screen. "AI interaction initializing." On the screen, an image of Mason appeared, a digital recreation of him, smiling wide, his voice playing, "Hey, sunshine, I missed you. Come back to me." It was wrong. All wrong. The voice was too clean. The words were too perfect. Lila wouldn't recognize that version of him. It was the man he pretended to be, not the one who broke and cried and held her cold fingers through the night. The screen flickered. Lila's vitals remained unchanged. "Phase 2, the tech said. More avatars. Her mother this time, digitally rebuilt from old video footage, laughing and singing a lullaby that sounded hollow through the speakers. Then another Mason, and another, smiling wider, repeating words written by software. Still no response. Silas sighed in frustration, watching from the corner. "Increase frequency input." "No," Mason snapped, stepping forward. Silas turned, raising an eyebrow. "You're not helping her. You're flooding her. She's not responding, because that's not what she needs." Silas crossed his arms. "And you think you know better than the entire team of neuroscientists I've flown in from 5 countries? Mason pointed at the machines. "You've given her noise, but she needs a voice. And yours is better?" "I don't know," Mason admitted. "But it's real." He reached down and removed the headset from Lila's brow. The techs protested, Silas shouted, but Mason didn't hear them. He sat beside his daughter and took her hand again. He closed his eyes. Then he began to hum. Just a few quiet notes, shaky at first. The melody from years ago. The one he sang during thunderstorm nights. The one his wife used to hum when Lila had colic as a baby. His voice cracked, old and unused, but he kept going. "There's light in the shadows and stars in the rain," he whispered. "Hold on, little dreamer. You'll fly once again." A beat, then another. Suddenly the heart monitor let out a subtle blip, faster than baseline, a gasp. The nurse on duty stood from her chair, mouth open. Was that? Mason didn't stop singing. He held her hand and sang the full verse, tears sliding down his cheeks. The room went silent except for the music from his throat, trembling but whole. Her fingers twitched. Once. Twice. Mason's breath caught. Silas, for once, said nothing. The nurse turned, calling for the attending physician. The machines lit up. The EEG shifted. Her pulse climbed, steady, soft, promising. "I told you," came a voice from the doorway. Mason turned, still holding Lila's hand. Micah stood there. Same hoodie, same bare feet, same unshakable eyes. "You gave her something the machines couldn't," the boy said softly. Silas turned. "Who the hell is this kid? Who let him in here?" But when the nurse turned to look, he was gone. Mason rose, ran to the hallway, empty. No Micah, no footsteps, just that whisper of hope still lingering in the air. He turned back toward the room. Lila's fingers moved again, and then, faintly, so softly he thought he imagined it, she whispered, "Daddy." Mason collapsed to his knees beside her, sobbing openly, forehead pressed against the edge of her blanket. Silas backed away, stunned into silence. The team of experts stood frozen. No explanation, no data to process what they had just witnessed. But Mason didn't need science. Not anymore. He only needed that voice, his daughter's, telling him what he never stopped hoping to hear. She was still here. She was coming home. It rained that night. Not a storm. Not the kind of rain that batters windows or sends people running for shelter. It was the gentle kind. Thin, steady, almost rhythmic, like the sky was sighing after holding its breath too long. Mason sat beside Lila's bed with the window cracked open just enough to hear it. the scent of wet concrete drifting through the stale hospital air. The lullaby still lingered on his tongue. He had sung it over and over again since yesterday, each note a thread he was weaving back to her, and it was working. Lila wasn't awake, yet, but her fingers twitched now without prompting. Her eyelids fluttered sometimes, just a flicker like she was trying to remember how to open them. Her breathing was deeper, no longer the mechanical shallow rhythm from before. There was color in her cheeks again, and Mason. Mason felt something cracking open inside him. He had spent the past year trying to be made of stone, solid, unshakable. The kind of father who could raise a little girl alone, run a repair shop, fix dinner, pay bills, never cry, never flinch. But it was all armor. And armor, as he was learning, didn't help when your daughter was drifting somewhere between this world and the next. It wasn't strength she needed. It was him, the real him, the one who used to dance with her in the living room on Saturday mornings, still in their pajamas, the one who built pillow forts that collapsed within minutes and told bedtime stories so bad they made her laugh until she hiccuped, the one who hadn't stopped singing until the day they buried her mother. He looked at her now and saw every version of her, all the ages she'd been, stacked on top of each other like pages of a storybook. Outside, the rain softened even further, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps. Bare, slow, almost inaudible, but definitely there. He turned toward the door just as it creaked open. Micah stepped in, soaked from head to toe, hoodie clinging to his small frame, jeans heavy with water. His bare feet were speckled with mud, but his face was dry, calm, almost radiant in the low hospital light. "You came back," Mason whispered. "I said I would," Micah replied, his voice soft but not tired. Never tired. Mason moved to stand, but Micah raised a hand. "No need. Just keep doing what you're doing." "She moved again today," Mason said. "She said my name. I swear she did." Micah smiled faintly. "I know. She's closer." Mason studied him. "Closer to what?" "To remembering who she is." Micah walked over to the bed, his feet silent on the cold tile. He placed a hand gently over Lila's, and for a moment they all just breathed. Mason didn't speak, didn't want to break the spell. "She's listening more now," Micah said, "but there's still something missing." "Tell me," Mason said. "I'll do anything." "She needs the song." Mason blinked. "I've been singing." Micah looked up at him, and for the first time there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. "Not that one. The one you haven't sung since the fire." The words hit Mason like a fist to the chest. He stepped back, his breath catching. "No, I can't." "You can," Micah said gently, "because she still remembers it, and so do you. I buried that song. You buried a memory, not the love." Mason turned away, pressing his palms against the wall. The song Micah referred to wasn't just any lullaby. It was the lullaby, the one he and his wife Grace used to sing together when Lila was a toddler. It was Grace's favorite, passed down from her grandmother. It became Lila's favorite too. She called it the Moonlight Song. She used to request it every night, whispering, "Daddy, can we find the stars again?" The last time Mason sang it was the night before the fire. He hadn't sung it since. "I don't know if I remember the words," Mason said, though even as he said it, the melody curled like smoke through the back of his mind. Micah didn't respond. He just stood there, waiting. And then, just barely above a whisper, Mason began, "There's light in the shadows, and stars in the rain." His voice trembled. Micah closed his eyes. "Hold on, little dreamer, you'll fly once again." Mason's voice cracked. He had to stop. Tears blurred his vision. He sat down hard, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Micah moved beside him. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "Just honest." Mason took a breath, then another, and then he sang again. This time it wasn't smooth. It wasn't polished. But it was real. His voice was raw, soaked in grief and hope. It cracked like dry wood, but it didn't stop. He sang the whole thing, and when it ended, He looked up at Lila. Her fingers moved. Her lips parted. The monitor spiked. Her pulse steady but rising. "Lila," he whispered, standing, leaning over her. "Lila, baby, can you hear me?" She didn't speak, but her hand, her right hand, squeezed his. Mason gasped. Micah stepped back, eyes shining. "She's coming." Nurses burst into the room. Alarms had gone off at the station. The lead nurse looked at the screen, eyes wide. Her neural activity just spiked. "Is she awake?" Mason asked. "Not yet, but she's responding. She's here." Doctors flooded in next. Chaos resumed. Lights, voices, questions. Mason didn't care. He clung to Lila's hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. Amid the flurry, Micah slipped away. Mason turned just in time to see him step into the hallway. "Micah!" he called out. The boy paused. "Who are you?" Mason asked, louder now, chasing him into the corridor. "Why are you doing this? Why us?" Micah looked over his shoulder, expression soft. "I was a child once," he said, "in a room like that, alone, afraid. I cried for days. No one came. No songs, no hands, just silence." Mason's chest ached. "I promised," Micah continued, "if I ever got the chance to change that for someone else, I would." He turned to walk again. Mason reached out. "Will you come back?" Micah smiled. "If she needs me, yes, but I think your voice is stronger now." Mason stood in the hallway long after he was gone, heart pounding. When he returned to the room, the doctors were still buzzing around Lila, but the nurse turned to him with a wide, tearful smile. "She's stabilizing, on her own." Mason nodded, eyes searching the window. A faint smudge of muddy footprints remained on the tile near the door. He knelt beside Lila, kissed her knuckles, and whispered, "You keep coming, baby. I'll be right here." That night, he sat in the same chair singing the same song, again and again, until the sun came up, because Micah was right. She wasn't gone. She was finding her way back. The morning came wrapped in gold. It streamed through the hospital blinds like a quiet promise, dancing across the floor tiles and settling gently on Lila's face. She looked almost awake now, more color in her cheeks, more depth in her breath. Her eyelids fluttered again, longer this time, as if she were dreaming instead of just lying in the dark. Mason hadn't left her side. Not for food, not for sleep, not for anything. He hadn't changed clothes in 2 days, hadn't shaved, hadn't cared. All that mattered was that she was here, that she was fighting her way back. He kept singing, over and over. The song had long since become more than a lullaby. It was a lifeline, a bridge, a compass for a little girl lost in fog. Every note he sang carried years of regret, memory, love. Every line reminded him of Grace, how she used to hum the tune while folding laundry, or how Lila used to sway in his arms to the rhythm of it, her small body pressed against his chest. "Hold on, little dreamer," he whispered now, his voice rough from repetition. "You'll fly once again." A light knock at the door pulled him from the song. He looked up, expecting a nurse. It was Micah. He stood just inside the frame, barefoot as always, hoodie dry this time, face unreadable. His presence didn't startle Mason anymore. Somehow, it felt natural, like Micah belonged to this place, like he existed between the folds of time, slipping in only when someone truly needed him. "She's close," the boy said. "I know," Mason replied, his voice hoarse. "I feel it." Micah stepped inside slowly, eyes on Lila. "She's listening to everything now, even the things you don't say out loud." Mason's jaw tightened. "I've told her everything I can." Micah looked at him, not judging, but knowing. "Not quite. There's something you keep behind your eyes, something heavier than guilt." Mason sat back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "It's not that simple." "It is to her." The room fell quiet. Mason rubbed his hands together, fingers trembling slightly. He hadn't spoken about Grace in detail in a long time, not since the accident. Not even to himself. He had kept those memories locked in a room somewhere in the back of his mind, the kind of room you board up and never revisit. But now, maybe Lila needed to walk through that room to find her way back. "She died in a fire," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago. A space heater in the garage sparked and caught the whole back of the house. I was in the kitchen. Lila was asleep upstairs. Grace was in the garage working on a project. Micah sat cross-legged on the floor, listening without blinking. "I got Lila out first," Mason continued, his voice beginning to tremble. "But by the time I reached Grace, it was too late. Smoke, flames, she was already—" He swallowed the words. "I couldn't get to her. I tried. I really did. But the heat was—" He shook his head violently. "God, I tried." Micah remained still, present, silent. "I carried Lila outside," Mason said, staring down at his hands. "And when the fire trucks came, I just stood there, holding her, watching it burn. Grace. She was the brave one. She used to say that love was louder than fear. I didn't understand that back then, but I think I do now." His voice cracked. "After that, I stopped singing, stopped telling stories, stopped being me." "That's the piece she's waiting for," Micah said softly. Mason looked up. "She's not just following your voice," the boy continued. "She's following who you used to be. The dad who believed in magic. The one who danced and told bad jokes and laughed until it hurt. I don't know if I can be that guy again." "You don't have to be," Micah replied. "You just have to remember him." A gentle beep from the monitor echoed through the room. Lila's heart rate ticked slightly upward. Micah stood, brushing invisible dust from his hoodie. "You're almost there, but now she needs something else." "What?" Mason asked, feeling the weight return to his chest. "She needs a story." Mason blinked. "What kind of story?" "The one she always asked for, before bedtime. The story of the girl who whispered to the moon." Mason's eyes widened. "How do you know about that?" Micah only smiled. "Because it's her favorite, and because you haven't told it in years." Mason stood slowly, as if waking from a long dream. He sat on the edge of Lila's bed, cleared his throat, and began. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a house filled with stars. Not real stars, but paper ones, cut from foil and hung on string. Her father made them for her, and every night she would whisper her wishes to them." Micah stood by the door listening. "One night," Mason continued, "a storm came and tore all the stars down. The girl was heartbroken. She thought the sky would never hear her again. But then, she remembered the moon." His voice softened. "She went outside, barefoot and brave, and whispered to the moon instead. She told it all her dreams, her secrets, her fears. And the moon listened. It didn't speak, but it glowed a little brighter." He paused. "Just like you are now, baby." He brushed her hair back gently. "The moon never forgot her, and every time she felt alone, she looked up and whispered, knowing that even if no one else heard her, the moon would." He swallowed hard. "Just like I'm hearing you now." Her fingers twitched again, this time more purposeful. She gripped his hand. Mason froze. "Lila?" Her eyelids fluttered. 1, 2, 3 times, then opened. Just a sliver, then wider. Mason's heart slammed against his ribs. "Hey," he whispered, tears rising fast. "Hey, baby girl, I'm right here." Her lips parted. "Daddy?" she rasped, barely audible. Mason collapsed forward, forehead pressed to her shoulder, weeping freely. "Yes, I'm here. I never left." She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused but aware. Where's the boy?" Mason stiffened. "What boy?" the nurse asked, rushing in. Lila turned her head slightly. "The boy, with the stars on his face. He held my hand. He told me you were waiting on the other side." Mason met the nurse's confused glance. "She saw him too." Lila gave the faintest nod. "He said his name was Micah." The nurse whispered something about noting that in the chart. But Mason didn't care about notes. He cared that his daughter, his miracle, was awake. That she remembered. That she had followed his voice back from the dark. Micah was gone again. No footprints this time. No sound. But Mason knew, just knew, he had been real. And somehow, some way, that boy had walked into their world and stitched it back together with nothing but silence, song, and a story about the moon. The sun outside was blinding the next morning, almost inappropriate in its brightness, as if it hadn't received the memo that the world had shifted. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Mason could see the change reflected in more than just wires and graphs. Lila was awake. Not fully, not alert like she used to be, but conscious. Her eyes followed movement. Her fingers reacted to warmth. She even whispered a word or two, fragments mostly. Daddy, home, light. It was enough to make Mason feel like the earth had tilted back into alignment. She didn't speak of the pain. She didn't ask why her body felt heavy or why her mouth tasted like metal. What she wanted to know was simple, pure, and completely Lila. "Will you sing again?" Mason had nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and so he sang. Not the lullaby this time, but something different, something silly, a tune he used to make up on the spot while packing her school lunch or brushing her hair in a rush. She smiled. Barely, just the faintest twitch at the corners of her mouth, but it was real. The doctors called it miraculous. They had no better term. The neurologist, Dr. Rourke, reviewed her EEG with a furrowed brow and murmured things like spontaneous neural reintegration and unprecedented cognitive rebound. The nurses, on the other hand, had their own theories. One said prayer, another said love. A third, older and quieter, just said, "There are things in this world we still don't understand." Mason didn't argue with any of them. He just held Lila's hand and kept singing. But something gnawed at him. Micah hadn't returned. He hadn't seen him since that night, when Lila first spoke his name. No one on staff remembered checking in a barefoot boy. No cameras caught a trace. No security logs noted a visitor under 10 years old. Mason asked everyone. Even Paula, the night nurse, shook her head and said gently, "Maybe it was a dream." But he knew better. Lila remembered Micah too. She asked about him twice now, once in a whisper, and again just that morning. "Is he coming back?" Mason didn't know how to answer. "Maybe," he said softly. "If you need him, he will." That night, after Lila had drifted into a light sleep, Mason stepped into the hallway to breathe. The air smelled sterile as always, but there was something else underneath it. Warmth. Not in the temperature, but in the feeling. As if the space remembered music, as if something still lingered in the walls. He passed by room 312, then 315, turned the corner, sat down in the little lounge at the end of the ICU wing, a space filled with tired couches, vending machines, and half-read magazines. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his throat was raw from days of singing, but still, he sat, waiting. Just before midnight, the softest shuffle of footsteps echoed down the empty corridor. He turned, heart already leaping. Micah stood there, dry this time, his hoodie zipped all the way up, hands tucked into the oversized pockets. The fluorescent light above him flickered, then steadied, casting a faint halo around the boy's tousled curls. "She doesn't need me anymore," Micah said quietly, walking toward Mason. Mason stood. "That's not true. She asked for you." "I know," Micah said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But she's got you now. That's better." Mason swallowed hard. "You said she needed my voice." "You were right." Micah nodded. "She still does. But now she also needs something else." "What?" "Her own voice," Micah said. "She's coming back piece by piece. You gave her your words. Now she needs to remember hers." Mason sat again, his legs weak. "Thank you," he whispered. Micah tilted his head. "Don't thank me. Just don't stop." Mason looked at him closely. "Why do you do this? Why help strangers?" Micah's gaze drifted toward the window. Because once, I was in a bed like hers. I waited a long time, for someone to notice, for someone to sing. No one did. Silence stretched. I told myself, the boy continued, if I ever made it back, I wouldn't let anyone else go through that alone. Mason's chest tightened. You're like an angel. Micah looked at him, gentle, amused. Not quite. I don't have wings, just memories. He turned, heading back down the hallway. Wait, Mason called after him. Will I ever see you again? Micah didn't stop. Maybe. Or maybe someone else will. You'll know them. How? They'll feel like a song you forgot, Micah said, but still remember how to hum. And with that, he was gone. No door opened, no camera buzzed, just silence. Mason stood in that hallway for a long time, long after the fluorescent lights clicked off one by one for energy-saving mode. He pressed a hand to his chest where something warm still lingered. Then he turned back to room 317, where his daughter slept beneath a blanket of stars. The next day, Lila asked for crayons. Her fingers were shaky, and she couldn't hold a pencil well, but the nurses gave her a fat blue marker, the kind used for posters and big letters. She gripped it clumsily in her right hand and drew a lopsided figure, a boy with a hoodie too big, standing barefoot in a swirl of stars. Mason leaned in, stunned. "What's that?" he asked softly. She smiled. "That's Micah," she whispered. She didn't need to explain how she knew what he looked like, even without ever opening her eyes during most of his visits. Some things didn't need logic. They just were. By the end of the week, Lila was moved out of ICU and into a recovery room on the pediatric floor. The nurses decorated it with streamers and paper butterflies. One of the staff brought in a small keyboard. Mason helped her press the keys, finger by finger, teaching her notes again. She laughed when she hit a wrong one. That sound, pure, high, unfiltered, brought tears to his eyes. Each evening, Mason told her a story. Some were old ones, about a girl who whispered to the moon or danced with shadows. Others were new, made up on the spot, stitched together with scraps of love and memory. And every night, he sang, the same lullaby, not just because she asked for it, because he needed it too. He realized he had been asleep long before Lila ever slipped into her coma. He had been moving through life like a ghost, checking boxes, surviving. But Micah had jolted him awake. Not just with miracles, but with truth. You can't bring someone back to life if you're not living yourself. One afternoon, as they colored together, Lila paused and looked up. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, Bug? When I get strong again, can we tell our story?" "Our story?" She nodded, tapping her crayon on the paper. "So other kids don't feel alone. So they know the dark doesn't last forever." Mason felt his heart split in two and mend again in the same breath. "Yeah," he whispered. "We'll tell it, however you want." She smiled and began to hum. The tune wasn't quite right, a little off-key, a little uneven, but Mason knew it instantly. "There's light in the shadows," she sang, "and stars in the rain." He joined her on the next line. They sang together, father and daughter, their voices soft but full of life. Neither noticed the janitor passing by the open door. He paused for a moment, leaned on his mop, and smiled. His eyes shone, though his hands were worn and his clothes hung loose like they belonged to someone else. As he turned down the hall, his voice carried softly, almost like a whisper. "You'll fly once again." By the start of the following week, the hospital was buzzing in hushed voices and sideways glances. On the surface, nothing looked different. Doctors still made their morning rounds with clipboards in hand. Machines still beeped their familiar lullabies, and nurses floated between rooms with practiced efficiency. But anyone who walked past room 317 noticed it immediately. There was a hum there. A warmth. A little girl who had been written off by specialists was now awake, smiling, humming, even laughing on occasion. The files showed no successful medical intervention, no miracle drug, no procedure that explained her recovery. All the reports said spontaneous response. Unexplained neurological rebound. Anomaly. But when Mason looked at his daughter, he didn't see a medical fluke. He saw a promise kept. Lila's words were slow, but growing stronger. She still tired quickly, but she was awake, and awake meant everything. She'd begun physical therapy, just stretching her fingers, wiggling her toes, slowly testing the world she had returned to. Sometimes she winced at the light. Other times she asked about the time she'd lost, and she still asked about Micah. On the third day after waking, Lila looked up from her lunch tray, a bowl of applesauce and half a banana, and said, "Did he come back yet?" Mason sat on the windowsill, sketching notes into a weathered notebook. "Who?" She gave him a knowing look. "You know who." Mason sighed softly. "Not yet. I've been looking. I even checked security footage." Her brow furrowed. "He's not on the cameras." "I know." She turned her plastic spoon in her hand. "He doesn't like being seen that way." Mason blinked. "What do you mean?" Lila shrugged. "He told me. Cameras see what people want to prove. He's not here for proof. He's here for truth." That sentence landed in Mason's chest like a bell ringing through fog. He had no idea where she found those words, but they were exactly right. Micah hadn't come to be documented or studied. He had come because a girl was lost and a father had forgotten how to sing. But not everyone saw it that way. Later that afternoon, Mason found himself sitting across from Dr. Rourke in the hospital's glass conference room, a sterile cube lit by sunlight and suspicion. Across the table sat Silas Maddox, the biotech mogul who had earlier promised innovation but delivered nothing but noise and wires. Silas leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "So," he said, "your daughter has made a recovery. Remarkable, considering none of our treatments showed effectiveness." "That's correct," Dr. Rourke replied, flipping through Lila's latest chart. "There was no physiological reason for her to regain consciousness when she did. All vitals remained flatline steady through the intervention period." Silas nodded, his gaze flickering to Mason. "And yet, here she is, laughing, talking." Mason didn't flinch. "Because she was never gone, just waiting." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Waiting for what? A bedtime song?" Mason didn't answer. Silas sat forward. "You've been telling people it wasn't medicine that brought her back?" "Because it wasn't." "Then what was it?" Mason closed his notebook. "A boy named Micah." Silas gave a humorless laugh. "Right. The Barefoot Prophet. He's real," Mason said. "There is no record of him," Silas countered. "No sign-in log, no camera footage, no nurse who remembers checking him in. Because that's not how he works." Silas leaned forward, voice dropping. "Do you realize what this sounds like? A ghost story. A fairy tale." Mason met his stare. "So, what if it is?" Silas frowned. "This hospital is funded by people who believe in science, not myths. And yet science failed my daughter. It was the myth that saved her." Dr. Rourke cleared his throat uncomfortably, but Mason stood, already done with the conversation. He placed a hand on the glass door. "You can call it whatever you want," he said. "I'll call it by name." He walked out without waiting for a response. That night, Mason read to Lila from her favorite storybook, a tattered collection of folk tales with a cracked spine and stars on the cover. Her voice still struggled, but her eyes were bright, full of light and memory. After he closed the book, she said, "They don't believe you, do they?" Mason shook his head. "They think I'm crazy." She tilted her head. "Are you?" He smiled. "Not if you saw him too." "I did," she whispered. "He sang when I couldn't, and he made the darkness feel small." Mason touched her hand. "You don't have to explain it to anyone. You just have to remember it." She nodded. The following morning, Mason found a note taped to her window. Small, folded twice, written in crooked blue ink. "Sometimes the healing comes before the waking. Don't stop singing just because her eyes are open. She still needs the song. No signature, no initials, just truth." Mason held it in his hand for a long time, unsure whether to cry or laugh. He tucked it into his notebook and opened a fresh page. That day, he began writing down everything he could remember, every line Micah had said, every moment they shared, every reaction Lila had. He no longer wrote for science. He wrote for remembrance. 2 days later, Lila took 3 steps with the help of her therapist. She nearly fell on the third, but she grinned like she'd conquered Everest. Mason was so proud he nearly forgot to breathe. She asked for markers after lunch and drew a new picture. This one of a boy holding a lantern, lighting up a winding path filled with stars. She labeled it Micah's Way. The nurses started asking questions. One even brought her daughter's old art kit from home. Lila beamed. She was slowly becoming the light again, not just to Mason, but to everyone around her. But it was the letters that made Mason realize this story was bigger than them. On a quiet Saturday morning, an envelope arrived addressed simply to Room 317, Child Patient. Inside was a drawing. Crayon on construction paper. A girl with wires on her head, holding hands with a boy in a hoodie. On the bottom was written in shaky letters, "I believe in the boy, too." Then came more. Emails, cards, social media messages. One from a parent whose son had been in a coma for a year. Another from a teenager struggling with depression. A third from a woman in hospice who had heard the lullaby through a friend and started humming it to herself at night. They all ended the same way. "I thought I was lost, but maybe I'm just not finished yet." Mason printed each one, pinned them on the walls of Lila's room until the nurses had to bring more thumbtacks. It was happening. Their story, this impossible, unprovable, utterly beautiful story, was beginning to echo. And somewhere in a hallway, or maybe a street corner, or maybe just behind the curtain of what people called coincidence, Micah was smiling, because someone was singing again. And that's all he'd ever wanted. 3 months passed. It wasn't the kind of passage that announced itself loudly or dramatically, no sharp lines drawn between before and after, but rather a quiet unfolding, like a flower opening petal by petal, unnoticed until one day it was fully in bloom. Lila had returned to her life slowly, piece by piece, as if reassembling a puzzle that had once been shattered. First her words returned, then her laughter, then her strength. By spring, she was walking again, wobbly at first, clinging to Mason's hand like it was the last rung of a ladder, but she never let go. Not when her legs trembled, not when her knees buckled. Not even when the doctors warned her she might not regain full mobility. She always whispered the same name before each step. Micah. She said it like a prayer, like a promise. Her therapists didn't understand it. The nurses smiled politely. The psychologist called it projection, or personified memory. But Mason knew better. Micah had been real. Even if he didn't show up on security footage, even if the staff chalked it up to exhaustion and trauma, even if no one else in the world could explain how a barefoot boy had slipped through the cracks of space and time just to sing a girl back to life. Lila didn't need proof. She remembered his scent. Like bread and rain, she always said. She remembered the sound of his voice, soft, low, threaded with sunlight. She even remembered the last thing he whispered to her when she was in the dark. "Your daddy's waiting on the other side. Follow the light." That line had become everything. It had carried her back, step by trembling step, and now, as she held a crayon in one hand and a paintbrush in the other, it became her art. The first mural she painted was on the wall of the new community center Mason had launched, Voices at Dawn. He had sold the last of his savings to fund it, quietly liquidating assets that once tied him to the man he used to be. A Range Rover, a lakeside property, the retirement accounts he'd never touched. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, Mason wasn't trying to build a future with money. He was building it with memory, with the truth, with the unspoken understanding that there were other children like Lila, other families fumbling in the dark, waiting for something, anything, to show them the way. The center opened with little fanfare but tremendous heart. A modest yellow building with floor-to-ceiling windows and walls lined with musical instruments, shelves of blank journals, canvases waiting for color. Its slogan was painted in blue above the front door, "Where silence ends and healing begins." Lila's mural took up the entire west wall of the main room. It showed a child in a hoodie too big, standing in a field of shadows. In his hand, he held out a single glowing note, like a musical one painted in soft gold, that lit up the darkness around him. Beneath it, in big, curling brushstrokes, were the words, "He didn't have wings, he had faith." Reporters began calling soon after. A few local stations, a parenting magazine, then an online platform dedicated to unsolved medical miracles. They all asked the same questions. Where's the boy now? What was his name? Is there any footage of him? Do you think it was divine intervention? Mason's answer never changed. His name was Micah. I don't know where he is, but I know where he was when it mattered. Some laughed, some dismissed it, but some listened. A mother with a terminally ill child wrote, "I don't need to see him. I believe he's out there." A widower sent a message with just 2 lines. "Your story made me sing again. I didn't know I still could." And then there were the letters, thousands of them, emails from prison inmates who hadn't heard a kind word in years. Voice messages from parents with children on ventilators. Photos from children in foster care, holding signs that read, "I'm not lost. I'm just not finished yet." That phrase, Micah's words, became a movement. It trended online, painted on signs in children's hospitals, written in marker on dorm room mirrors, etched into guitar straps and tattooed over hearts. Mason and Lila knew something rare was happening, something honest and raw, not built on fame or money or manufactured inspiration, but on the most human thing of all, connection. So they leaned in. They started a small YouTube channel, just stories at first, Mason reading bedtime tales, Lila drawing while he narrated. Then came the music. Mason's songs from the notebook he used during her coma, his voice still cracked and imperfect, but always sincere. They called it Micah's Echo. In 2 weeks, the channel hit 2 million views. In 4 months, they had over 10,000 messages from every corner of the world. Some joyful, some aching, all real. People started sending in their own stories. A man who'd been homeless for 12 years found a job and wrote, "Your daughter reminded me I still had something to offer." A teenage girl in a psychiatric ward sent a video of herself singing Lila's lullaby on a rooftop under the stars. Every message ended the same way. "I thought I was lost, but now I think I'm just not finished yet." One evening, Lila and Mason went for a walk through their old neighborhood. She wore her purple rain boots even though it hadn't rained in days. "Just in case," she said, skipping slightly. "Micah told me the best surprises happen when you're ready for them." They reached the quiet street corner near the train station, the one with the broken street lamp Mason had always meant to fix. There, beneath the flickering bulb, sat an old man playing a harmonica, his notes drifting lazily into the evening air. At his feet was a cardboard sign. "You're not lost. You're just not finished yet." Lila gasped. "Daddy, look!" Mason blinked, heart pounding. He approached the man slowly. "Where'd you get that phrase?" The man smiled through a grizzled beard. "Heard it from a little boy years ago. Played music with me for a while, said he traveled light, only carried truth. One day, he just vanished." "Was his name Micah?" Lila asked, eyes wide. The man nodded like he was recalling a dream. That was it, Micah. Mason felt something bloom in his chest, a warmth that melted doubt and disbelief in a single breath. "He's still out there, Daddy," Lila whispered, gripping his hand. Mason nodded. "Yeah, I think he is." That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, staring at the moon like it held answers. Mason joined her, silent for a moment, then asked, "You okay, baby?" She hugged her stuffed giraffe to her chest. I was thinking, what if Micah finds another little girl who's lost? What if she's scared like I was? Mason brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then I hope someone is singing nearby. She nodded solemnly. We should teach the world to sing. He smiled. You want to do that? Yes, she said, like you taught me, but bigger, like everywhere, on the internet, on rooftops, in the middle of the night, when people feel the most alone. Mason pulled her into his arms. Then we'll do it? And they did. They sang into microphones in living rooms, into headphones and hospital beds. They shared their story not because it made sense, but because it mattered. They taught others how to find their voice, not the polished, practiced one, but the real one, the cracked one, the one made from all the pieces of who they were and who they still hoped to be. Because that's what Micah had given them. Not wings, just faith. And that was more than enough. 1 year to the day after Lila opened her eyes, the Voices at Dawn Community Center was packed. The folding chairs had been set out hours earlier, and still more people stood in the back, shoulder to shoulder, as sunlight poured through the tall windows and danced across the mural on the west wall. Lila's mural. The boy in the too big hoodie standing with a golden musical note in his outstretched hand. Beneath it, in blue brushstrokes, the words, "He didn't have wings. He had faith." Mason stood off stage, watching her. His heart thundered in his chest, not with fear, but something deeper, something primal. A fierce, trembling gratitude that didn't fade with time but only grew stronger every day. Lila wore a white dress with lavender flowers stitched along the hem and a purple ribbon tied loosely around her waist. She clutched a microphone in her two hands like it was a lifeline, her knuckles white but her eyes calm. She looked older than 10. Not in her face, it was still soft, still round with childhood, but in her posture, in the way she stood, like someone who had seen the dark and come back not just alive but stronger. Mason remembered everything at once, and the first hospital room, the wires, the whisper of the lullaby, the tears, the quiet, Micah, God, Micah. He still saw the boy in his dreams sometimes, walking down an endless hallway, barefoot and radiant, humming softly. The way he tilted his head, the way he spoke without needing to raise his voice, the way he vanished just when Mason most wanted to hold on. But he'd left something behind. Lila, her voice, the echo that hadn't stopped ringing since. She cleared her throat. The room fell silent. "Hi," she said, her voice barely louder than a breeze. "Some of you know me. Some of you know my dad. Some of you just heard a weird story about a girl who fell asleep for a long time and woke up singing." Laughter, soft and warm. She smiled. "I don't remember all of it. The machines, the days in the dark. But I remember him." There was a stillness, a breath held by everyone. "I remember how he held my hand, how he smelled like rain and bread, how he said he wasn't here to save me, just to remind me I wasn't alone." She swallowed, glanced at Mason. "He told me to listen for my father's voice, and I did. I found my way back with a song, a real one, a broken one, but it was full of love." Mason's throat tightened. He had to close his eyes for a second to keep from crumbling right there. Lila lifted the mic again. "I want to sing it now, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine." The music began. Just a soft guitar, the same simple chords Mason had played night after night at her bedside. Then her voice joined, clear and trembling, as the first line left her lips. "There's light in the shadows, and stars in the rain." Each word settled in the air like a thread stitching people together. "Hold on, little dreamer, you'll fly once again." By the time she reached the second verse, Mason noticed something in the back row. A boy, small, barefoot, sitting quietly with his hands in his lap, a soft smile on his face. Mason blinked, heart racing. The room spun slightly. He blinked again. Gone. No one near the chair even looked like they had moved. No one noticed anything unusual. No heads turned. But Mason knew what he'd seen. He knew who? Micah. He didn't chase. Not this time. Instead, he watched his daughter finish the song, watched her step down from the stage to thunderous applause that felt less like clapping and more like collective exhalation. People cried. People stood. And Lila just smiled, calm as a still lake. Later that night, they walked home under a navy sky freckled with stars. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that carries meaning. Lila held his hand, her purple boots scuffing the sidewalk. "Do you think he saw me sing?" she asked suddenly. Mason nodded. "I think he never missed a moment." She tilted her face up to the sky. "Do you think he still helps people?" "I hope so." "Me too." She was quiet for a few paces. Then, "I've been thinking." Mason raised a brow. "That usually means something big is coming." She grinned. "I want to keep going, with the songs, the stories, not just in the center. Bigger. Bigger how? Like, the world. What if there's a kid like me right now, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for someone to tell them they're not lost?" Mason's chest ached in the best way. "Then we'll tell them." She turned to him. "Every day?" "Every day." They did. Together, they recorded more songs, more stories. They filmed skits and interviews, conversations about fear and hope, animations of dreams whispered to the moon. They called it Isaiah's Echo at first. Then, Micah's name came up again and again in comments and letters, so they changed it. Echo Micah. It wasn't just a name. It was a movement, a message, a lifeline. By the end of the year, the channel reached over 10 million views. A foundation was formed. Schools invited Lila to speak. Hospitals asked for her drawings to be hung in pediatric wings. Other children began submitting their own echoes, videos of them singing lullabies, writing poems, painting light into the dark. But Mason never lost sight of the beginning, of the silence, the breathless nights. The boy with no shoes who reminded him that even if the world didn't believe in miracles, it didn't matter, because they still happened. He once told a reporter who came from New York to write a feature story. Some miracles wear lab coats. Others wear bare feet and carry songs. The article went viral. People called it myth, folklore, exaggeration. Mason didn't argue. He just kept singing. One night, as he sat alone in the center after locking up, he noticed something tucked behind the strings of Lila's guitar. A note. Small. Folded twice. Written in crooked blue ink. "Tell her stories every night. Even when she's grown. Never stop singing." No signature, no name. But he didn't need one. He pressed it to his heart and smiled. Because the truth was, Micah hadn't saved Lila. He hadn't even saved Mason. He'd simply reminded them both that they were never truly lost. Just unfinished. And that was enough to start everything. Life lesson from the story. Sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from medicine or machines, but from something far more human. A voice, a story, a song, or the quiet presence of someone who truly sees you. This story reminds us that faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives barefoot and unnoticed. And love doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. It only has to be real. Through Mason's raw honesty and Lila's unbreakable spirit, we're reminded that silence doesn't mean absence, and darkness doesn't mean the end. There are moments in life when everything seems lost, when logic fails, and hope feels foolish. But in those very moments, it's often the simple things, words spoken from the heart, lullabies sung with cracked voices, and stories whispered under stars, that lead us back to ourselves. Micah didn't just guide Lila home. He helped her father remember how to be present, vulnerable, and brave. And in doing so, he reminded all of us that we're more connected than we think, and that sometimes just showing up, with truth, with tenderness, is enough to change everything. So, wherever you are right now, whatever darkness you may be walking through, know this: you are not finished yet. There's still light, still music, still a story left to tell. Now, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We'd love to know how far Micah's echo is reaching. And if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that just might be the voice someone else needs to hear.